Is the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians the revival of an ancient conflict recorded in the Bible?
The nation of Israel is a resurrected nation. What if there was going to be a resurrection of another people, an enemy people of Israel?
The Dragon's Prophecy. Watch it now or buy the DVD at thedragonsprophecyfilm.com.
Coming up, a new controversy on social media involving Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk and me. I'll explain. I'm also going to consider the plight of Christians who are targeted and tortured by Islamic militant groups in Nigeria. I'm going to reveal how the daughter of a founder of Hamas found Jesus through her dreams. And Nick Matau, Navy veteran activist, is going to join me. We're going to talk about the biblical context for prophecies concerning Israel. If you're watching on YouTube, X, or Rumble, listening on Apple or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
I see this morning that Tucker Carlson has a very friendly, I would say almost devotional interview with none other than Mr. Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is a guy with whom I have some experience myself, having debated him now, I guess a few months ago it was. And my debate with Nick came about because he was going around posing as the alpha male. No one will debate me. Ben Shapiro's scared of me. Charlie Kirk's scared of me. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm not scared of you. So let's debate the Iran strike. Let's debate Israel, radical Islam. And we had a pretty lively and spirited debate. Substantively, I have to say Nick was kind of out of his depth, but I think he knew that. He's nevertheless a glib, facile type of guy, and impressive in his own way for a 20-something. And I even told him that in the discussion. Now, after this debate, I got a very agitated series of texts from Charlie Kirk, of all people, basically saying, why did you do this? And I'm like, well, because someone needed to show him up. Someone needed to actually expose the fact that he is out of his depth. He doesn't know and has no historical sense of the topics he's talking about. And so I decided to play that role. And Charlie's like, well, you're magnifying this guy. You're giving him a platform. And then I'm quoting Charlie, he's vermin, meaning he's bad news. And of course, I recognize that Nick had said things that were deeply anti-Semitic, pro-Hitler. Some of it said half in jest, but again, half in jest. That means it's half not in jest. And so here we see this interview with Tucker and Nick, and it is actually of a very different caliber. Tucker is not challenging Nick. Tucker is doing his usual, well, I guess Debbie's going to jump at this, but he's doing his usual kind of fluffer routine, which is he has these guests, and what he's doing is he's just massaging them and building them up. And giving them a platform and kind of like heartily going along. This is what Tucker did with the nun with the mustache. He did it with so many others, and he's doing it with Nick. And so I felt obliged. I haven't done this, of course, in months. I had no intention of doing it. I'm like, hey, look, Tucker, it seems to me that you are trying to become Mr. Turning Point, right? You're the main speaker at the upcoming conference, and you are trying to sort of, in some ways, maybe even take over Turning Point. I don't know. But the Turning Point people need to know that Charlie was not on board with this kind of fluffer routine. In fact, Charlie believed that I shouldn't even debate Nick. It's not even enough to refute him, challenge him, expose him. Charlie's point is this guy is poison. He's bad news. And so I released those texts with Charlie Kirk, and it's creating a big flurry on X right now. Tons of people are weighing in on all sides. But I think mainly my reason for doing this was simply to show the Turning Point is at a turning point. They're just going to have to decide, are they going to let Tucker steal Turning Point away from Charlie? I think that's the larger issue of what is really going on here. And the Nick Fuentes thing is simply one episode that really reflects that Charlie really was not on board with any of this. now that Charlie is gone, Tucker is sort of is pulling in a completely new direction, while pretending that this is in full continuity with what Charlie was doing. And these texts prove that that is absolutely not the case. Now, let me ascend to a topic that has gotten too little attention, but something needs to be said about. And I intend to cover this topic in more detail really over the next subsequent days and maybe even weeks on the podcast. And this is the beheading, the persecution of the Christians in Nigeria. Now, the larger significance of this, connecting it in some ways to the dragon's prophecy, and by the way, if you haven't seen it yet, the DVDs, they're available. They're actually flying out the door. They are perfect gifts for Christmas. So this is a great time to kind of load up. Go to the Dragon's Prophecy film.com, sign up for DVDs. Also, there are at least 3 streaming platforms showing the film. So if you want to stream it, you can watch it that way. The DVD, of course, is a great way to share it. But the point I'm getting at here is one of the themes of the film is that in the end times, one of the signposts to look for, we can't pin down dates and times, so we can look for signposts. And one of the signposts is going to be an escalating anti-Semitism on the one side against the Jews, but also persecution of Christians. Because after all, as Jonathan Cahn says, the Christians are the spiritual Israelites. So that is the kind of larger consequence or larger importance of what is happening in Nigeria. It's just not some remote episode in Nigeria, because let's remember also that the same radical Muslims who are going after the Jews, let's call it the jihadis, they are reflected in Hamas and Hezbollah within and on the borders of Israel, but they're reflected in Boko Haram, which is essentially an ISIS type, an Al-Qaeda type group. And Boko Haram is active in northern Africa. Now, let's remember that a lot of these African countries are part Christian and they are part Muslim. In fact, there are a bunch of African countries that are close to 50% of each. And both sides are competing, but they're competing in a different way. The Christians are growing by and large by conversion, and the Muslims are growing by multiplication, by reproduction, by having 5, 6, 7 kids. So Islam is sort of stymied because it can grow that way, but it doesn't seem to be able to grow any other way. The Muslims are having very little success in preaching the word and having people go, oh, that makes sense, I guess I'm going to become a Muslim. But the Christians are, in fact, having success with conversion. And so the Muslims are very agitated, and they want to destroy these Christian communities. And so you have these attacks. Since 2009, Islamic jihadists have massacred 50,000 Christians in Nigeria. They've destroyed thousands of Christian churches and schools and farms and other institutions. And these are reports by a variety of groups, the State Department, the Commission on Religious and International Freedom, Open Doors, other human rights groups. Nigeria now, the government downplays all this. In fact, I saw an article in Al Jazeera, of all places, basically trying to say, no, let me just read you the title here. It's by the Special Assistant to the President of Nigeria. There you go. This is the government sort of doing its cover-up act. No, Bill Maher, there's no Christian genocide in Nigeria. So according to this article in Al Jazeera, which can safely be put largely to propaganda, the article says, no, this is actually a fight between farmers and herders. So the farmers are the people who grow crops and cultivate land, and the herders are the people who have cattle, and the cattle are searching for new lands to graze upon. So according to this guy, that's what the fight is about. It's between the farmers and the herders, except one group happens to be Islamic, and the other group happens to be Christian. And the people who are Islamic keep talking about a holy war and a jihad. They are targeting these Christians. They are targeting churches. If you were just fighting about farming rights or grazing rights or the rights of the pastoral man versus the rights of the sedentary man, then you wouldn't need to go burn their church down, would you? So quite clearly, even though there might be, and there usually is, whenever you look at religious wars, the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War in Europe, there were territorial issues. There were other issues that come into play. There are always issues of power and control. But this is not to say that the religious dimension of it can be ignored. Now, here we are as Christians in the United States, and there are so many Christians who have been whining now for weeks, if not months, if not years, since October 7th, whining not about what happened to Israel, which is a very good reason to whine, but whining about Gaza. Oh, there's a genocide going on in Gaza. Well, first of all, if there's a genocide going on in Gaza, show me the 50,000 people who are killed in Gaza. I mean, I realize you can use Hamas numbers, but the Hamas numbers have actually now been checked. Now that there's a pause in the fighting, there's a chance to go in and take a look. Let's look at the population of Gaza. Show me the 50,000 missing people in Gaza. They don't exist. Just like when people keep showing you pictures of rubble in Gaza, you might have seen recently on social media innumerable pictures of life in Gaza today. And you have people going into restaurants, they've got iPhones and cell phones, they're ordering lattes, the infrastructure is all in place. So what are you telling me, that this restaurant was put up like within 7 days? And it already has a full-scale clientele. It's got baristas, it's got people serving muffins and all kinds of pita sandwiches and so on. Nonsense. The point is that this infrastructure was always there. It was never knocked down. Yes, there are in fact scenes of rubble, and there were buildings that were leveled to the ground, but there is also all kinds of life in Gaza that has continued over the past 2 years. So the point I'm trying to get is the selective attention. Look, I expect it from the mainstream media. I don't want to really dwell on that. These people are hopeless. They're known liars. But I don't expect it from Christians and conservatives. I don't begrudge you a concern about civilian casualties. If you watch The Dragon's Prophecy, we are just as distressed about civilian casualties on either side. And I make the point that any civilian casualties, either on the Israeli side or on the Palestinian side, these are victories for the dragon. This is basically the dragon's celebration, because the dragon's currency is destruction and death. And I quote Golda Meir, the former Israeli prime minister, "We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children, but we cannot forgive them for making us kill their children." I think that statement, which I've quoted before on the podcast, in a way captures the whole complexity and also moral ambiguity of the civilian targeting. But what about Nigeria? If we are Christians, shouldn't we care about our fellow Christians being massacred by these radical Muslims in Nigeria? I think that, quite honestly, a single SEAL Team 6 or SEAL team dispatched by Trump could take care of this problem. Because these perpetrators are known, their locations are known, they're doing this out in the open, and they're doing it because the Christians are more vulnerable, and the Christians do not have equivalent force to use against them. And so, hey, if America is a Christian country, if we care about our fellow Christians in the world, I'm not talking about the United States getting involved in a war. What we're seeing is an internal massacre based on religion. So if we want to protect religious freedom, here's a way to do that, and to do it very effectively and to do it very quickly. We'll talk in subsequent days about more details about how all of this is going on. I'd like to have a couple of people from Nigeria, but maybe also from ministry groups that are working with and in Nigeria to give us some of the details of how all of this is playing out. Now, I saw a very interesting story. Actually, Debbie showed it to me about a daughter of Hamas. This is a young woman who is the daughter of one of the founders of Hamas. I've talked before about, and I did a special episode of the podcast on Mossab Hassan Youssef, who's the son of Sheikh Hassan, one of the founders of Hamas. But Hamas was founded by like 5 guys. And so that was one of the founders. Here is a ex-Hamas wife whose father helped create the terrorist group. We're talking about a woman named Juman al-Khawazmi. Juman al-Khawazmi. Probably there was a guy, well, maybe this is her married name. I'm not really sure. But in any event, her father was one of the creators of Hamas. And she was raised to hate Israel, taught to curse Jews and curse Christians. And then something happened that has been happening, it seems like a lot these days. And that is she saw Jesus in a dream. Wow. Jesus came to her in a dream. I did an episode on this podcast probably now a year or two ago talking about Muslims who see Jesus in their dreams. And basically what Jesus says is something like, you need to follow me. Go and find a teacher who will show you how to do that. And so these Muslims show up at the church, and the pastors or the priests are like, what are you doing here? And they go, I saw Jesus in a dream. I need you to instruct me about how I can become his follower. And our friend James Tour, who is a professor at Rice University, a world-famous computer scientist, but also a chemist, he has talked about ministering to Muslims who have seen Jesus in dreams, and in some cases have converted to Christianity, in some cases simply in their own lives just become followers of Jesus. And but here we have the Juman al-Qassami, and this is evidently what happened. She saw Jesus in a dream. He spoke to her in Arabic, and he said, "You are my daughter. Do not be afraid." Now, do not be afraid, I should say, is one of the most common phrases in the Hebrew and the Christian Bible. Many times at a time of crisis or fear, you have God saying directly, or you have the prophets saying, or you have Paul saying, do not be afraid. In other words, the situation looks dire, but God is in control, and so fear not. And this is a very important thing to say because Muslims seem to live a lot of their life in fear. They fear the Christians, they fear the Jews, they fear the world. They also fear God in a, well, we are supposed to fear God. So I'm not saying that the fear of God by itself, but one should not live in terror of God because God is indeed a judge, but God is also someone who loves us. And so an unhealthy fear is not something to be recommended. And here we have Jesus himself, or at least Jesus in the dream, saying to her, "You are my daughter, do not be afraid." Evidently, the woman got the hint, took the message, and has now, in fact, become a Christian. So this is, again, a very interesting phenomenon within Islam. And it seems that within Islam, more than anywhere else, we have this communication through dreams. I haven't heard about it coming from Hindus. I don't hear Hindus say, I had a dream. But for Muslims, and by the way, in Islam, dreams themselves have significance. Dreams have a lot of significance in the Middle East. Let's remember in the Bible, you have Pharaoh has a dream, and then Joseph comes and expounds what the dream really means. Pharaoh's own interpreters can't get it right. Joseph tells him what the dream means, and Pharaoh goes, okay, well, you are clearly someone anointed by God. So this is the same phenomenon attested to in the Bible that now seems to be playing itself out in a very striking way, even in the bowels of the Islamic world. There's a powerful new film coming from Angel Studios on the Wonder Project. It's called Young Washington. It tells the untold story of how George Washington's character was forged long before independence, when he was just 20, facing failure, loss, and near death. Directed by John Irwin, who made The Jesus Revolution, American Underdog, and starring Andy Serkis, Ben Kingsley, and Kelsey Grammer, it's a sweeping, high-quality production that reminds us what true leadership, virtue, and providence look like. This isn't revisionist history, it's the real story told with courage, truth, and respect for the values that shaped America. Young Washington releases Independence Day 2026 on the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding. Become an early supporter by joining the Angel Guild today. Premium members get 2 free opening day tickets and help bring this inspiring story to theaters across America. Go to angel.com/Dinesh and help make Young Washington the #1 movie this Independence Day. You've heard me talk about movement mortgage and reverse mortgages on my podcast. Now, most people who are over 62 or and close to or in retirement, they think reverse mortgages are bad. They're to be avoided, something that's not good for them or their kids. Now, that's too hasty. You need to think more. You need to get the facts. Read the book I read. It's called Home Equity and Reverse Mortgages, the Cinderella of the Baby Boomer Retirement. It's provided by Movement Mortgage, which is a trusted partner of this podcast. This book debunks the myths and shows that most people should look at reverse mortgages as soon as they turn 62 and not as a last resort. You can get this book free from our trusted partner, Movement Mortgage. Just go to movement.com/Dinesh. Again, movement.com/Dinesh, or you can call 580-REVERSE. That's 580-738-3773. NMLS ID 39179. Hey guys, over the past several weeks, Debbie has been showing me some Instagram videos by one Nick Matau, who I was not familiar with before this, but the videos were so well done, so on point, so eloquent, that I'm like, who is this guy? I need to have him on my podcast. We need to talk about these issues. Well, Nick Matau is a content creator. He's an activist. He's a U.S. Navy veteran. He served on fast attack nuclear-powered submarines. But this is also a guy who has studied the complex history and archaeology of the Middle East and of Israel, and I think he is someone who has a lot to say to in our current debates. By the way, you can follow him on X at Nick_Matau, Matau. He's also on TikTok. He's also on Instagram. Nick, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I was asking you actually if your name, Matau, was Portuguese, and you said no, it actually is a Samoan name. So that's an interesting tidbit. Let me start, however, by asking you about Israel, because it's a topic that I haven't focused on for most of my career. Now that I kind of wander into it, make a film about it, I suddenly realize the level of intensity around this topic, particularly among the people who hate Israel. Largely, I used to think on the left, but now it turns out, and somewhat to my dismay, there's a considerable contingent on the right. They are downright obsessed with it. When you look these days at Tucker and Candace, for example, to me, they're unrecognizable from the old Tucker and the old Candace. They are all about Israel. And what I wanted to start by asking you is, what is it about Israel that seems to provoke this kind of fanaticism, this kind of obsession? You have a tiny country the size of New Jersey, and yet you seem to have guys right here in America who spend all day thinking about it. Why is that?
Yeah, first, Dinesh, thank you so much for having me on. I just saw The Dragon's Prophecy last night with my fiance. I was absolutely moved by it, and I've been watching you since I first became conservative in my younger days. I started off with 2016 Obama's America. It was one of the first films I watched that started to turn me conservative. To answer your question, I think there's biblical aspects with Israel, and then there's also just the historical and the geographical location. All of it matches with Israel. Geographically, that spot has always been a hub for trade, connecting, multiple continents together. And so naturally, you want to think in anthropology and human culture, that's going to be a tense spot, regardless who is there. Now, you add in on top of that with Israel and biblical prophecy here. As for my thought on why, sometimes I wake up and I see a new thing. Just this morning, I saw Tucker Carlson interviewed Nick Fuentes, and he talked about how much I haven't watched the whole interview yet, but I watched the part where he said how much he hates Christian Zionists and how they've infiltrated the church, and it's just the worst thing ever. And I sometimes ask myself the same question: what is it that makes people focus so much on Israel? I think that people have such a hatred for Jewish people. I really do. I know they like to say, oh, everything you say is anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism, and specifically with Israel, is not just sometimes a double standard that is applied to Israel. Sometimes it's a singular standard that's applied to Israel. Sometimes there's a standard that they've never even heard of before that they will only apply to Israel. I think that stems from the hatred for Jewish people, and in some aspects, it manifested in hating, communist and capitalist societies, capitalist and communist societies. And in this aspect today, it's not the Jews; it's just their state.
We have a line in the Dragon's Prophecy where I say, and I'm actually reflecting something Jonathan Cahn said first, that the devil is the first anti-Semite. And I take Cahn to be saying that no natural or rational explanation of anti-Semitism is adequate. Even after you have taken that explanation into account, there's a part of it that is not explained. And if you don't go to the spiritual dimension, you don't capture the full sort of demonic element of it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I do absolutely agree with that, Dinesh. I think there's, when you see anti-Semitism today, you notice it's a copy paste of anti-Semitism we've seen in the past. Yes, they switch words a little bit, but it's a copy paste. And, there's the saying where the devil cannot create, he only copies and mimics. And so there's this aspect where anti-Semitism is what I call a sleeping giant. When people say to me, Nick, why do you think anti-Semitism has gone up so much recently? I don't know if it has particularly gone up so much recently. I just believe it to be a sleeping giant, and it doesn't take a lot to wake it up. And then the more you see anti-Semitism, like you said, obviously very much on the left for at least the past 10 years, arguably more, but you started to see it on the right. I just believe anti-Semitism is a nasty thing that just gets woken up. And in today's day and age, in the contemporary times, Israel is, the excuse that they use to wake that anti-Semitism back up.
What I'm worried about in this context, and I'm going to focus here on the political side of it for a moment, not the spiritual side. You've seen a anti-Israel, anti-Jewish takeover of the Democratic Party. Now, that was not obvious. The Democratic Party, when I first came to America, the late 70s, the 80s, was pretty pro-Israel. Both parties were. So it's ironic. It now seems like that virus, if we can call it that, has infected the Democratic Party, and we are facing the prospect, I won't say the likelihood, but the prospect that the same virus could be taking over the Republican Party and the MAGA movement, in which case the right and the left would be coming together in a shared hatred of Jews and of Israel. Now, this is not a day I would have thought I would have lived to see. Is this something that concerns you?
No, it concerns me every single day. When I think of the left as someone who's right-wing, it's not that I ever wish them ill or harm or anything. I want all Americans to come together. But of course, I'm always going to stand with my values and morality, always, no matter what, if that's versus the right versus the left. So when I see the right starting to rise in anti-Semitism, and these aren't fake, they're real. And when I see it, I find it problematic because the reason, as a Navy veteran, I served for almost 12 years. As someone who loves the greatest country in the world, the United States of America, I love this country. The reason I stand with Israel is nothing more simply than it is good for America. And so when I see people not just criticizing, or not criticizing, you can criticize whatever you want. When people shift their values away from Israel, especially when they shift their values into other aspects, foreign countries that do not have America's best interests at heart, it's not about being pro-Israel or not, or even fighting against anti-Semitism, although there's a part to that. It's about that is not what's best for the United States of America. And every major empire society in history, you see when they start off, it starts with anti-Semitism, and then it goes to the persecution of Jews, and then it goes to the fall of an empire. And I do not want the United States of America to make the same mistakes that people in the past have.
Nick, one of the themes that you've stressed in your videos, and I want you to sort of expound it for my audience, is that Western audiences, the Western mind is somehow not so well equipped in grasping the on-the-ground realities of the Middle East. I suppose part of it is that Westerners are looking at this from a long distance away. Part of it is that their experience is so different. But if you were to just speak out about what do you think that the Western mind gets most wrong about the region, if there's one kind of big thing you want people to know that it seems like Westerners just don't get, what is that?
You know, I just had this talk yesterday with a guy named Dr. Mordecai Kedar. I do live debates on TikTok almost every night, and I'm trying to have him on my show one day. It's interesting because he brought up a very good point, and I want to mimic it here. A lot of people, when talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or Islamism in general and their fight against the West, which is as old as Islam itself, when you look at this, everyone talks about history, which is very important. I'm getting my second degree in Middle Eastern history. Absolutely great. However, what people don't talk about enough is anthropology. And that is specifically in the Arab and Islamist culture and what it means to the West. So the West, as you said, there's a far distance, but it's more than distance. Geographically, we have two big oceans on either side of our country. And the American person is, again, greatest country in the world. I love it. But especially as someone who's a military veteran, Americans, to put it lightly, are spoiled in a lot of ways. They don't understand. I was in Israel about this past Passover, so maybe 6 months ago, 5 to 6 months ago. And the amount of times that I had to go into the shelter for, a rocket attack, the siren goes off, I've been talking about this a lot. I've been to Israel before that trip, so it's not something that I'm not particularly used to, or at least understand. But for Americans, just the sound by itself is in a completely different world. And so then when you look and you shift that to Islamist culture and the fight against the West, I mean, our United States Navy was permanently formed under Thomas Jefferson because of what? You hear people like Dave Smith, a lot of people start to talk about how, America, is getting attacked by Islam because we invaded their countries. Well, what was the excuse during the time of Thomas Jefferson when 1.5 million European and Americans were taken, hostage, enslaved? And when asked specifically about why are you doing this to us, the Muslim Barbary pirate said, because it's in our Quran and, you're a kafir, an infidel, whatever you want to say. And so there's been a very clear shift of mindset of Islamism and their thought on the West. And I don't think Americans can grasp that, because when you look at Americans, even some of, our leaders, even some that are pro-Israel, there's a lot of thought of, fight a little bit, but then, shift to diplomacy. And I think that works very well when you're the most powerful country in the world and you have, a big pond in between you and your enemies. But for Israel, it's not like that. They're surrounded by their enemies. Israel has genocide knocking on their door every single day. And so Israel is the only country in the world, it seems, that doesn't get to win a war, especially a war that they didn't ask for or start. And I don't think Americans can grasp that. Americans are very much, I am against war. I'm against war. I'm against war. And hey, I don't think anyone out here is saying that they're for war, but I don't think anyone out here is also saying that we should end war incorrectly. We need to end it the correct way. For America, that might look different than for a tiny little country the size of New Jersey that's surrounded by enemies that hate her.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, look, I think what you're saying is that if you look at the size of Israel, right, which is about 10 million, America's 300 million. So America is 30 times the size of Israel. 1,000 people or 1,200 people were killed on October 7th. Let's multiply by 30. That would be like people coming across the border of Mexico and killing 30,000 Americans, 10 times as many as were killed on 9/11. I'm quite convinced if that happened, America would not be satisfied short of the complete and utter decimation of the people who did that. So I think you're right that Americans are like, this is all over there. And in some ways, I'm even interested in listening to Trump, whom I support, and I think his intentions are good. But when he says things like, we're looking at an unending vista of peace in the Middle East, a new age is upon us, I say to myself, I don't think that Netanyahu would talk like that. I don't think that anyone in Israel would say that, because they understand that even if we make temporary truces with people, you're making a truce with someone who's like, okay, listen, I'm flat on my back. I'm going to make an agreement until I can get up and find my knife, and then I'm going to go after you once again. In other words, this is in fact the mindset of the region. And isn't that really what you're saying, is that you can make you can sign on the dotted line, but the underlying roots, the underlying mindset, the underlying ideology, that's going to be a lot harder to change.
That's absolutely right. And, you look at the region and also the people in general, this is the concept of a hudna. For those who don't know what that is, it's a Islamist way of a temporary peace, right? Until you're strong enough to actually properly attack your enemy. When Yasser Arafat was asked why did he accept some type of deal with Israel, he said at the Johannesburg address, Muslims will remember the Hudaybiyah Treaty, when Muhammad signed a treaty with his old tribe in Mecca, and then later the early Muslims actually attacked Mecca, and that's what Yasser Arafat referenced, for Muslims to remember the Hudaybiyah Treaty. They do not think, and I don't think Americans can grasp this either, Islamists do not think in the terms of 6 months or 1 year or even 100 years. They think in the terms of thousands of years. And hey, why shouldn't they? What they are doing, they believe, is from their God. Who are you? When we talk about, well, why don't we just de-radicalize them? Like we did the denazification program. The denazification, that was a generation of people. Now, of course, anti-Semitism existed before that in Europe, but Nazis were a generation of people. And yes, there was a denazification program. These people are not one generation. Hamas is not one generation. Hamas is a symptom of an idea that has lasted 1,400 years. And this idea that you can just de-radicalize them. Who are you to go to them and say, listen to this and do not listen to your God? Of course, they're not going to listen to you.
Let's talk, Nick, in the little time we have left, about this issue of replacement theology. I've seen that you have addressed this topic, I think, very well. What would you say is the thing that is most off base about replacement theology? Let's define replacement theology very simply as the idea that somehow the Old Testament is replaced by the New. The Old Covenant is replaced and displaced by the arrival of Jesus the Messiah. God's promises to Abraham and his descendants have now been revoked or abrogated. So what is the thing that is most wrong about it? Is it a political misunderstanding? Is it a theological misunderstanding? Or what is it? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll start with the theological. I think there's the theological misunderstanding, of course. You have the idea of a covenant with the Jewish people. Whether we're talking about, Catholic or Protestant, you have people like John Calvin who explain this, and the Catholic catechisms explain this as well. But regardless, you have Deuteronomy chapter 7 and Genesis chapter 1, and this idea, to put it simply, that the covenant with the Jewish people is somehow temporary, or God changed his mind or shifted, is insane. And it's not founded in scripture whatsoever. To answer about political ideology, I do believe that there are a lot of people who have whether it be a political motivation, they have improper friends, whatever the motivation might be, to shift Christians away from the Jewish people, to sever that connection of the Jewish and Christian alliance. There's a motivation there, and it's a very evil, disgusting motivation. And I think for some aspects, maybe some people are misreading theological interpretations. For a lot of people, it's a political motivation, and it's very problematic. And we have to ask ourselves, who benefits, who gains the most from severing the relationship between Jews and Christians?
And
if
who
you
is
can
that?
answer that question.
Yeah, go ahead and answer the question. Who benefits the most?
Well, if you ask, I'm going to say Islamists as a whole. But of course, I mean, we're going to talk about it. Qatar, this Qatari influence into our government. In fact, it's all projection. Every accusation they keep saying about the Jews and Israel and their control of the American government. It's very interesting how those actual accusations can be applied to Qatar. You see, we saw today, Candace Owens let out a tweet. I just pulled it up right now this morning. She said, for clarity, if Qatar ever offers me $120,000 a month to say what I already believe about Israel, I will be accepting. Sounds like the best deal ever, to be honest. And this was in reference to somebody saying about Pam Bondi, and she worked for an organization that Qatar paid $120,000 a month to lobby for the Qatari government into our government. Qatar, on average, for the past 20 years, at least that I can think of off the top of my head, has given into our university system $235 million a year, every year. And it's increased. If you look at the past 5 years, it's even higher. And that's our youngest adults. And if you want to take over a society, who do you go after? You go after what I would say is the dumbest adults, which is naturally our youngest adults. That's who you go after. And the fact that no one's talking about this, but you hear AIPAC every 5 seconds. You definitely hear AIPAC every 5 seconds. Number 191, I think, in lobbying. I think since 1998, they've lobbied like $65 million. Yes, they had the super PAC this past midterm and the past presidential election. But even still, even if you combine all of that together, has lobbied less than what Qatar has put into our university systems and things like this $120,000 a month in 1 year. And people don't talk about that.
I saw something just yesterday, Nick, that kind of disturbed me greatly. And it disturbed me not because of its significance, but in some ways its insignificance. You might remember Bill Bennett, right? Bill Bennett was the education secretary under Reagan. Somebody I knew pretty well in those days because my early work was illiberal education. I was writing about the universities. So Bennett and I did some events together. And then fast forward now almost, 40 years, 45 years. And I see that Bill Bennett has registered as an agent of Qatar. Bill Bennett is actually going to be doing paid lobbying for Qatar. And it just struck me that the Qataris have so much money. And, I know the realities of life in politics. Like Bill Bennett used to be a really important person in the Reagan era. He's probably well into his 80s now, or certainly late 70s, probably early 80s. Most people at that stage in life could use some money. So along come some Qatari sheikhs and they go, hey, Bill Bennett, you still have a lot of old friends. Would you register as under the Foreign Agency Act and we're going to pay you? I don't know the amount. I don't really care about the amount. But what I'm getting at is this shows you the degree of Qatari penetration where they are, digging up old cabinet members from the Reagan years and signing them on. Yeah, it's just a small thing, but I saw the actual form, and so I had no reason to doubt the authenticity of it. And it reinforces your point that, guess what? People say Israel pays some influencers $1,000 or $7,000. Qatar is buying whole university departments. They're buying Hollywood studios. They're buying giant organs of media. So talk about disproportionate influence. And like you say, you're not going to hear Tucker or Candace talking about that. All right, guys, I've been talking to Nick Matau. Content creator, activist, U.S. Navy veteran. Follow him on X at Nick_Matau. By the way, on Instagram, it is at Nick_Matau. Pretty much the same handle as on X. Hey, Nick, this was great. Thank you for joining me, and let's have you back sometime.
Absolutely, Dinesh. Thank you so much. Okay.
Really appreciate it. MyPillow is excited to announce they're in the middle of their biggest 3-in-1 sale ever with a limited edition product, a back-in-stock special, and a closeout deal you won't find anywhere else. Let's start with MyPillow bed sheets, just $29.88, any color, any style, any size, even kings. Regular price $119.98, now just $29.88. But once they're gone for good. My Towels finally back in stock, but not for long. Get a 6-piece My Towel set, regular price $69.98, now only $39.98. And for the first and only time, get their limited edition premium My Pillows made with Giza cotton and a designer gusset, queen size $17.98, kings just $19.98. Also for a limited time, when you order over $100, you get free shipping. You also get $100 in free digital gifts. So don't wait. Go to mypillow.com or call 800-876-0227. That's 800 876-0227. Use promo code Dinesh. Get the best offers ever. Quantities are low, so act now. Once again, it's mypillow.com, and don't forget the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh. Guys, with the new movie up there, I'd like to invite you to check out my Locals channel and become an annual subscriber. I post a lot of exclusive content on Locals, including content that's censored or you won't find it on other social media platforms. On Locals, you get to know me better. You also get Dinesh Unchained, Dinesh Uncensored, and you can interact with me directly. I do a live weekly Q&A every Tuesday. So tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, no topic is off limits. I've also got a movie page on Locals with a bunch of cool films, some by me, some by others. But 2,000 Mules is up there, Police State, Vindicating Trump, Trump Card, our only feature film called Infidel, starring Jim Caviezel, and of course the new one just released, The Dragon's Prophecy. Hey, if you're an annual subscriber, you can stream and watch these movies for free. They're included with your subscription. So check out the channel. Time to act is now. Go to dinesh.locals.com. I'd love to have you along for this great ride. Again, it's dinesh.locals.com. The remarkable thing about death is that it comes upon you sometimes like a thief in the night. And what I mean is that not all of us have a chance to anticipate and prepare for our death in the way that we would like. We often live our life under the assumption that we'll get older and then frailer, and we'll see death coming at a distance, and we'll have plenty of time, kind of like we're in a car and we can kind of see the precipice, but it's kind of far away, and maybe it's getting a little bit closer, but hey, it's still a long distance away, and guess what? Maybe it's an optical illusion. Maybe I'll actually be able to go on the road a lot longer before I actually end up reaching that final point. But this is not the case with everybody, and in fact, not even the case with most people. The more normal way that people die is that even if you're pretty old and you don't think you're ready, something hits you. And it could be an accident, it can be a disease, it can be cancer, it can be a tumor, it can be one thing or another, and then you suddenly have to recalibrate. Now, I'm not talking about a situation in which you have like no time to prepare, in which you're struck, dead without warning at all. That's what happened, for example, to Charlie Kirk. One moment he's there, vital and full of life. Another moment he's got a big hole in his neck, and unfortunately he dies almost instantly. And anyone who saw that video would be quite sure of what happened, even though the actual announcement came some hours later. But we all know people, friends, relatives, other people we know, and they are approaching the precipice, and they know it, and they have a limited amount of time to think about it and to plan for it. And the question I want to ask here, and I'm slightly jumping out of my text for today, out of the sequence of my book, Life After Death, just to reflect aloud on the question of what can one say to such a person in this situation? What kind of hope can you offer them? And here's how I think about it. There are so many big questions in life itself that are impossible to answer definitively. But the fact that we can't answer them definitively doesn't mean that we don't have not only a strong intuition about what the answer is, but the more we reflect upon it, the more we realize that this intuition is logically supported. So let me say what I mean by that. Here we are flung into the world, and if you are at all reflective, you're going to think about things like, well, like, where did I come from? And I don't just mean, where did I come from? I obviously came from my parents, but why? How did we get humans at all? How did we get creation? Who made all this? Who made the world? Where did the world come from? How did things begin? There's no kind of obvious answer to that question. In some ways, we know something about the how, the Big Bang, and so on, but we certainly don't know the why. A second question that comes to your consciousness, if you think about it, regarding life: what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of my life? But more generally, what's the purpose of life at all? Is there a purpose? And if so, what is it? Third, connected to the first two, is what happens after death? Again, these are questions that cannot be definitively answered, in part because the type of answer that we normally give when we are looking for answers is of a much narrower scope. Typically, we're looking for questions like, how do I get from here to Chicago? And how do I fix my car? And how do I plan my retirement accounts? Those are operational questions. It's much easier to answer them within the context of life's experience than to answer questions like, why do we have a world? And what is our purpose? And where are we going? Nevertheless, we kind of know, applying our reason, that things don't appear, quote, by themselves. As the Greeks used to say, out of nothing comes nothing. And yet here we have a world, and therefore our intuition says that this world was, in some respect, created. It was made. And we don't have to have been there to know that. And the reason I'm saying this is this also applies, by the way, to life after death. Shakespeare calls death the undiscovered country. We can't know for sure, but there's a part of us that intuits, that foreshadows. Guess what? I know that there is a part of me that is not material. Let's think about this fact for just a moment and dwell on it. Because now we're talking about just an empirical inventory of ourselves. Number one, when I look at myself, what do I see? I see that I have arms and legs and toes. I notice that I can move my toes. And I also notice that I have a mind. And what I mean by that is I have a mind that is of a different caliber than, let's say, my arms and my toes, right? Because, well, here we go. I'm looking at my index finger. It's about 3 inches long. If I put it on a weighing scale, it probably weighs an ounce or so. But let me apply that to my mind. How long is my mind? What are its dimensions? How much does it weigh? I realized right away that my mind, which is no less real than my finger, in fact, I need my mind to move my finger. My finger doesn't move just by itself. If I were to paralyze my mind, take away my mind, my finger would not move. So in us as human beings, there is a material dimension which we are very conscious of. We are no less conscious of our immaterial selves. And we cannot imagine any existence without those immaterial selves. And not only that, but if we believe some of the most powerful philosophers of the past 2,000 years, starting with the philosopher named Berkeley, all our sensory experience, all of it, without exception, passes through our minds. That's how we have the experience in the first place. I'm not denying that there are things out there in the world. I'm saying that those things out there in the world would be imperceptible to me if they didn't come through the mechanism or the medium of my mind. There is simply no other way for me to experience them. Now, what does this tell you? Well, what this tells you is that the physical part of your body, you know for a fact, is going to disintegrate. It is going to go away. It is going to crumble. This is not to say it's going to, quote, disappear. It's going to return to nature. As the Bible says, dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. But let's focus for a moment on the word thou, because I am not, in fact, my finger. I am not, in fact, my toe. I wouldn't even talk about having a finger or having an arm if my arm was me. If I possess an arm, there has to be some me that is not my arm that possesses that arm. And so what I'm getting at is that me, which is to say the immaterial me, is something that is not subject to the same laws of perishability as my physical body. In other words, my physical body goes away, but what about my consciousness? What about my mind? So the big question here is it possible? Clearly, as human beings, our mind can only exist within the framework of our physical bodies, right? We don't see minds floating around in the world. They come attached to and emanating out of physical bodies. But this is not to say that when the physical body perishes, that consciousness perishes with it. In fact, as you'll see in the rest of the book, I'm only giving you a little bit of a preview of where I'm going, and I'm giving you a modern-day recapitulation of an argument that was really made in the 5th century BC by none other than Socrates. What's interesting about Socrates is he's not making his argument based upon divine revelation. He's basing his argument entirely upon the kind of secular reflection which you've just heard me give today. And so I am repeating Socrates' argument, but modernizing it, bringing it into the 20th century and tethering it to our actual world of experience. And all of this is telling us that while our bodies will indeed perish, there is a part of us, in fact, the most important part of us, the part of us that makes us us. That part of us lives on.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.